First thing I want to comment on, Terramar is an interesting name because Terra, everyone knows what Terra means. Duh, right? Mar actually means sea, which not everyone might be aware with. So I thought I just had to comment on that really quick. I should probably, well, so the map continues to expand its retinue. I could be wrong, because I've had a rough couple of weeks here, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time the map has expanded beyond the characters that it would make sense for the map to be interacted with. Now, I'm okay with that. It's just more establishment of the pack. Now, we talked about this before, because the map called Starlight, but that makes sense. Starlight had personally interacted with the map and had actually cast magic and been involved with it, so that lined up. The map had called Spike, but same general difference. And I think there was like one other one. I might be misremembering. But either way, up until this moment in time, everything everyone that the map had called still made sense and was still directly connected either to the 6 or to the map itself, right? This is the first time it's reached out and truly, no really, unequivocally, unarguably has branched out and actually reached out to someone beyond that inner circle, and thus we have the Cutie Mark Crusaders. Now, this still makes sense to me. We actually talked about this the last time this came up, but to refresh that briefly, it makes perfect sense to me that the map is expanding in basically the exact same way that Harmony is. As Harmony as a concept becomes more and more of a thing, as civilization slowly expands out. Remember, we've talked about that extensively with the school episodes and with the Shadowplay episodes. As civilization as a concept, as coordination, interaction, understanding, tolerance, respect, harmony becomes more of a thing. It makes more sense that the map, which is so integrally tied into that very concept, would thus be able to expand as well, both its operations and its range, as we've already seen. Hi, DJ Flick. Well, you mean on the Switch? Unless you're talking about something else, in which case, never mind. Either way, I'm going to buy it on the Switch. You kidding me? Someone actually asked why I would buy that on the Switch. So I can play KOTOR in the future. Playing KOTOR on the PC is a pain in the arse. And being able to play it like this, oh yeah. That's the 10-year plan right there. So the map expands. Woo. They then tell Twilight that they don't need a chaperone. Now, I'm a really big proponent of the Pokemon theory. For those of you not familiar with it, the Pokemon theory is you can send a 10-year-old out into the world and it's okay because the world is cool, right? Because it's better than real life. That's really what the Pokemon theory boils down to. People like to bash that theory because people like everything to be dark and evil and horrible, and that's whatever. I just don't agree. I'm rather fond of things every now and again. Just every now and again, I'm okay with things not being dark and terrible and horrible. So Equestria is better than real life, and I don't want to sound like it isn't. But even if I lived in Equestria, even if I lived in Pokemon, even if I lived in whatever idyllic world you want to pick, like Earth in Star Trek, for example, in TNG era, I would still want at least one chaperone for a trip like this. It's pretty much the exact same reason why I stayed at my sister's last weekend. I was fine. I was cool. But just in case. It is literally the safety net, right? It's literally the safety net of we're going to be okay. So I'm completely with Twilight going along and doing that. Hi, Trathan. Also, I mean, listen, Loner. So, blah, 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 blah. Of course, Twilight wants to revisit, wants to, has the permission slip, blah, blah, blah. And there's the running gag of her needing to do research, and ultimately she's just trying to have some fun and branch out and have a vacation. A, I think Twilight can afford a vacation. B, I like how she's not actively trying to deceive people in that route, right? Like, she's actively... It's mostly a joke in universe, is what I'm trying to say. It's like, oh yeah, I need to go do research. Right? I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that. I think this isn't Twilight trying to come up with an excuse. I think this is Twilight trying to come up with more stuff to do, because she's very efficiency-minded, and the definition of efficiency, one of the definitions of efficiency, is getting more done with less. So while she's there, she'll also do this, and she'll also do this. And yeah, getting some more cultural and political and economic ties between the ponies and the sea ponies and the hippogriffs is probably a good move. hate to keep talking about the world building of the politics of Equestria, but you're listening to me. I don't know what you want from me. So, so they go in. Yay, woo! New cultural comments. That's really cool. Listen, she could have apologized to the queen, but they couldn't get the actress back. I looked that up, apparently. I don't know if it was a money thing, or if it was a scheduling thing, or if they just didn't reach out. But for whatever reason, they didn't actually get the actress back, and that's why the queen isn't in this episode. Apparently, that was something that was being debated. Anyways, so they, so Apple Bloom is giving a recap about how the Storm King invaded, and they had to be like, oh my god, and they, lol, Ross. It could be Mordora, it could be. And normally I'm against recaps in long-form television. I've talked about this as far back as my Babylon 5 stuff is the first time I really brought up the paradox of recaps. And we've brought it up in MLP as well. As much as I actively dislike recaps, and would probably not do it on my own shows, I see why they're there. Not everyone's binging, not everyone has my memory, not everyone is that invested to be like, oh my god, it's that person from 3 weeks ago. You know, not everyone is doing that, so it's nice to have those little recaps for the important stuff. And this is a pretty cute way to do it. Apple Bloom telling the exaggerated tale thereof. And apparently Applejack did not actually lie about it, it was just Apple Bloom. So then they see Mount Eris, and it looks extremely awesome. No, really. I mean, I know we already saw it in the movie, but that's just brilliant visual design. You notice that almost the entirety of all the civilized stuff is either at the very top and the very bottom. And I looked at that like, oh my god, it's Teldrassil. No, think about it. And I've always loved that concept. I have. And I'm unashamed of that. You know, there's the top of the tree, the top of the thing, and you're way up there, and that's where most of the city is. And then there's a way to get all the way down to the bottom, and this is where your connection point is, where your trade hub is, where people come and go, right? It's a cool concept. I love it. And they do some great stuff visually for this. And yeah, we do need to give another continuity counter for the movie and for the way they do this. Arguably, we should probably give another one because the events of the movie directly matter for this episode, just in general. The very nature of the two species and the cultural distinction between the two is the premise of the episode, so... And that only happened because of the movie, right? I actually liked the flag, too, personally. Because this is a really unique situation. These are... I agree with you, Medora. Medoro. So these are the same species. Well, that's a weird way to say that. You see this person in the underwater and see this person. These are the same species. And they are. But it's effectively the beginning of two cultures. And I love how they present this. This is... okay, this is an awful example. But I'm going to go with it because it's still an accurate example. This is the first colonists, British colonists, in North America. Because they're still British. They're still people who are, you know, who have lived and grown up in England. But now they're living over here. By choice, of course. It's kind of by choice. And now the distinctions pretty much start to happen. The different cultures, the different ideas, the different mentalities start growing and building and escalating pretty much immediately, right? And that's exactly what we're seeing here. This is the very beginning of this culture divide. Because all of these are the same people until extremely recently. Probably, at this point, days or weeks ago. And yet, now some of them have chosen to go home, and some of them have chosen to stay in their new home. And you see the divide. It's a brilliant construction, and it makes a lot of sense, and I love it. It also helps sell toys. You ever think about what has to happen in the writer's room at MLP? Because they're really good at this. They're really good at thinking up some really cool, interesting, engaging, fun, world-building, well-thought-out, mature, adult topics and conversation points. And then they're like, okay, and now we need to sell toys. So how do we merge those two concepts together? And they tend to do this pretty well. You know, the map, which I've gushed about so much, sold the Crystal Castle playlist. The two divided cultures things now sells the Hippogriff toys and the Sea Pony toys, and it's all sorts of stuff like that. Oh yeah, by the way, in this very episode, we see a Sea Pony version of the Cutie Mark Crusaders. So now there's 3 more toys we can sell, right? It's interesting the way they do that. They got to fund it somehow, and they need Hasbro's approval, and I think they did a really good job of, let's call it what it is, satisfying the executive mandates. And anybody who's seen me discuss any show, Babylon 5 or Star Trek or Star Wars, knows satisfying the executive mandate is half of the difficulty of making a television show. So, props on that one. Anyways, so they talk about, man, I wish the map would be more specific about our mission here. It doesn't really work like that. I was thinking about that because, yeah, exactly, Trathan. I was thinking about that. It's probably, it could be argued that it doesn't really work that way. You ever heard of the concept? Of course you have heard of the concept, the observer affects the observed. A similar concept that usually only comes up in fiction is if you go to a destination with a goal in mind, that changes your perspective. This is actually something I've talked about in a different format. Nomen. No mentioning is what that means. In other words, if you walk into something with mentions, it colors and taints and changes your perspective of how you perceive it. Now, how much that changes is going to depend on all of the variables, but it is a change nonetheless. The map instead doesn't say you're going here to fix this and this with this and this. The map sends people to a location. Therefore, as little mentioning as is possible to do, while still sending the right people to the right time, the right location, right? It's kind of clever in its own way. And once again, I hate to gush about the map, but it's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant storytelling tool. I love it. Hi, Pillow Willow. So, then we talk about the transformation thing. Now, I had a whole thing I was going to write up about this. I was going to do a massive discussion about this. And then Terramar mentions that the only reason he can do the transformation regularly is he has a piece of the pearl. That actually pretty much codified everything I was theorizing about. So I'm going to throw that paragraph out the window and just say, this is some cool world building. It's very clear that the way this works is the pearl, the magic pearl, is the source of that enchantment. It is effectively maintaining an enchantment on all the sea ponies. They have the buff Sea Pony, infinite duration. It can remove that buff, turning them back into a hippogriff, and it can restore that buff. Pretty simple. This is all the stuff I was theorizing about. The episode makes it very clear that's how it works. It is also a bit of a finite resource that's important. That is also kind of interesting because that means Terramar is very, very lucky. He has a piece of the pearl. So he has the ability to renew and restore that buff pretty much at will. And he shows this several times in the episode. Now, they might know how to make new ones. That's something that's not even addressed, so I'm not sure about that. I imagine if they reached out to Equestria and had the full breadth of resources of all the unicorns who are studying and all of the alicorns, they could probably make another one. But we don't know. That's pure speculation, so I'm just going to leave that there for right now. Either way, it's kind of cool how that functions. It does, again, mean, and I want to re-stress this because this is going to be important later, it means Terramar is incredibly lucky. I do hope you enjoy it when you get into it, Pillow Willow. This is an episode talking about cultural divide, divorce, and disability. So that's one of the reasons I like this show, is it actually handles those kind of mature adult topics surprisingly well. Anyways, so they go up, and this is when they really start showing off. I'm just going to gush for a second. They really show off. They've got the trees and the houses, and they've got the food. You notice they're carnivores. You catch that? It's not even emphasized, but they talk about some of the food they eat, and they show some of the food they eat in the background. Now, that's important in its own right, because that's pretty much the second time that's a race, one of the pony races being definitively carnivorous is actually shown in a fairly obvious manner. Now, this makes sense. Duh, right? Of course it's carnivorous. They are literally prey animals. That makes perfect sense. That lines up. But it's interesting because Twilight has no problems eating some of these things, too. I decided to do a brief amount of research on that. Apparently horses can eat fish, they just don't get a lot of nutrition out of it because of the way their digestion works. But it is something they can take in. It also kind of makes you wonder about the whole which animals can think, which animals can't think. And once again, that divide is kind of an important divide that needs to be there. Because we have demonstrated animals that clearly have degrees of sentience and sapience. They might not be able to talk, but they can communicate complex and fully fleshed out thoughts and perspectives, right? Except we haven't noticed any fish doing that. We have demonstrated bears doing that, and bunnies, and chipmunks, and all sorts of things, but not fish. And I find myself wondering if that's essentially the dividing line that the creators were thinking of. It's like, okay, look, let's just make fish non-sentient. Everyone cool? And everyone around the writing room was like, yeah, cool, let's just go with that. There you go. Whoosh. Problem avoided. We'll see if they do anything about that in the future, because, I mean, these are predators. The fish did roll its eyes, but I don't think that's sentient. I think that's a joke. Yeah, this is almost assuredly a Zootopia kind of situation. And that's also true, Sean. Anyway, I want to comment really quick. Skybeak, that's the dad, is voiced by Brian Dobson. Now, I'm only bringing this up for one reason. I've been bringing up some of the guest star actors several times throughout this series, and there's a recurring trend, and I've noticed it before, and it just keeps happening. Brian Dobson, you probably don't recognize him, but he's done a few voices, especially for the Warhammer 40k games. He's actually the voice of the generic Space Marine in the Dawn of War series. And this is just a weirdly recurring trend. I think this is about the 7th or so guest actor who is also on MLP, who is also a voice actor specifically for the Dawn of War series or the Warhammer 40k video games in general. This just keeps happening. Did someone at MLP play these games and think, oh, that's a great voice. Let's call that person. Anyways, I'm sorry, moving on. It's men and women too, both, by the way. Maybe it's the same studio, maybe they have the same thing. I don't know, but it keeps happening. This is similar to something I've talked about in my TOS ruminations. For those of you not aware, or those of you not watching them, like you, Ross, the Star Trek The Original Series was being made in the same lot as Mission Impossible, the original Mission Impossible back in the 60s. So there was a whole lot of bleed over of talent between Mission Impossible and Star Trek The Original Series. Between actors, directors, people who were building sets, set designers, costume design, all that stuff. So there's a whole lot of bleed over there too. Might be a similar situation. Anyways, yes, this is a Xenos Paradise world. Hopefully they never find it. Anyway, so so then they get to the top of the settlement. It's really, really, really cool. And the Glad to Be a Hippogriff Festival. Now that gets a grin out of me. And after I made a note here that I wasn't sure if they did it on purpose. I think they did. So I mentioned how this episode discusses divorced parents and cultural divide and disability. There's one other thing it dips into very briefly. Didn't I say glad? Glad to be a hypocrite? I swear I said glad because that's what's written in my notes. Anyways, they dip into one other thing. Identity. This is something that's been kind of pulling into modern real-life stuff, and I'm not going to touch this so much, but identity politics has certainly become a thing lately, about being who you really are. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I'm pretty pro-choice. I'm pretty pro you being you. And if you say, I want to be a hippogriff, and that's who I am, and that's who I choose, you can see why these people have a every weekend festival celebrating the fact that they have now the option to choose, that they can be who they are. Yeah, exactly. And that makes perfect sense in this case. They were literally forced to be sea ponies. That wasn't a choice. That was a flee. That was them retreating from an oppressive force, a marauding empire, as I talked about it. Yeah, it's kind of like the Cutie Mark Festival. Pretty similar. So that's kind of wholesome and that's kind of awesome. And the way they show it, yeah, no, it's pretty legit. Is that a real one, Hazardous? The way you phrase that, I don't know, man. Yeah, it's also a choice only half of them adopted. Which, again, makes sense. In its own right. Either way, thank you for the sub, Hazardous, as always. I do always appreciate. You remain awesome, sir. If you know we want to put that, please let me know. I'm going to put it towards Darkborn again. No! I imagine the Queen chose water, but I don't know, and I have no real way of knowing. So, yeah, I don't know. Okay. So, Terramar is like, yeah, that's kind of the problem I'm having. And he literally gets cut off in the middle of this sentence by Sweetie Belle becoming enraptured by the harmonizing heights. Later on, after the song, she literally says that she is biased towards the harmonizing heights, not towards the mountain, not towards the upper area, just that one spot. Yes, I did, Hazardous. That's how that works. If I see one of those things, I jot it down when it goes through. Yeah, Harmonizing Heights is actually a really cool name. And does look like a really awesome point, and I would admit, I would absolutely want to visit the Harmonizing Heights. That sounds awesome. No pun intended. Thankfully, Sweetie Belle screwing this up doesn't actually last very long. They immediately recognize the problem, and this is where we get into it. Okay, cool. I don't know why it's bugging you to send a thing. It's the same, whatever. Twitch be Twitch, yo. So, there's this person. I have 2 great places to live. I have to choose. Now, some of you may or may not know that I am I don't know what you call that. Being someone whose parents have divorced. There's a term for that, and I can't think of what that's called. A childless separation. I can't remember the term. Doesn't matter. My parents divorced when I was 4. So that's obviously immediately and absolutely where my brain went to with that. However, the second thought I had pretty much immediately was that this would also qualify when it comes to a cultural or an international divide. I actually already hinted at that if you were paying attention when I made the colony comment. You know, moving to America or staying in Britain. Maybe the one parent stays here, maybe the other parent stays there. I want you to keep that comparison in your mind, too, because that's going to come up later. Either way, this is where we really start to get into that. This... Yeah, Mr. Kenway, yeah. We'll circle back to this point in a little bit, but I want to once again mention how this show does a good job of tackling these kind of topics. And it clearly puts a good highlight on how confusing and how emotionally unstable it is to be in between those 2 worlds, whether it's 2 parents, or 2 cultures, or 2 literal physical places. By the way, all 3 apply here, which I think was on purpose. So then they go down, they go to Sequestria. Aha, by the way. If you don't get it, obviously Sequestria is the pun, but sequester. The place they went to hide from the Storm King is called Sequesteria. Yeah, anyways, so they go down there, they transform. We already know that ponies can transform. We saw that in the movies, and I think I commented on that. And then Scootaloo starts swimming. Yeah. I started jotting down a note in my notes about that. And then she actually says, this must be just like flying. So she actually got there before I finished typing up my notes on that. If it's not apparent, my first thought was, of course she loves this. Of course she would adore swimming. She's never actually been able to fly, except in her dreams. And so the idea of her having that full 3-dimensional movement, and just, duh, right? And then, of course, she said it. This is, once again, an example of this show showing and telling, which is a very common thing on this show. So, yeah, there's the disability thing. This is something, and I just want to say this, I hate to do this direct comparison, but I do feel every now and again the need to defend this show. Star Trek Deep Space Nine had an episode about disability. It kind of sucked, but in that episode, there's a bit where the woman in question, who, her disability, so she was an alien, so actually her disability was gravity. She grew up on a very, very, very low G world, and so she needed an exoskeleton to be able to operate in normal 1G-ish gravity, right? There's a scene in that episode. First of all, that episode kind of sucked because it kind of stumbled over itself. But there's a scene in that episode where she goes on in this one area and she lowers the gravity and just flies around and tries to have... Basically, it's trying to do the same thing that this episode does with Scootaloo. Now, granted, that was live action done in the mid-90s, and this is animation done in the 2018s. So there is a gap of technology and competency between these two things. But Scootaloo flying around, swimming around, and absolutely adoring the sensation of being able to do what she's been unable to do her entire life works way better and hits the heartstrings way harder than that episode. In the interests of fairness, Scootaloo is someone who's been with us for 8 seasons. We met her all the way back in season 1. Random guest star lady, I can't even remember her name, was random guest star lady, so that's also a difference there. I just wanted to comment on that direct comparison because, yikes. So naturally, Scootaloo immediately falls in love with this because she can swim here. And she can just go around and move, and there's no limitations, and she loves it. You notice how she also swims very fast very frequently, so it's not like she has to, you know, it's like, hang on. No. She's keeping the speed she loves, and she can just do it in full 3 dimensions. So it's pretty much universal positive. And of course, they can sell more toys. Scroll down a little bit. So this is when we get to our first conceit of the episode. Both parents are loving and have the backing to take care of their child. This is yet another example of Equestria being a better place than real life, because in real life, what tends to happen most frequently is that one of the parents might have the ability to take care of the child, and the other one probably doesn't. What also sometimes happens is neither parent has the backing, and when I say backing, I mean the place, the money, the income, the time, the energy to take care of a child. Because it requires a lot of all of those things. So he is quite fortunate to have 2 people with the necessary backing and all that implies to be able to take care of it. So he has a choice. There's a valid choice between the 2. So, this is when the episode rears its ugly head. Sweetie Belle, yeah, we're up to 2 lucky things, and there's another one I'll be bringing up in a minute. Sweetie Belle already is very obviously biased towards harmonizing heights. She checked the mark thing really, check. Scootaloo is obviously super biased towards Equestria, because duh. Then the song comes in. My first thought was, damn it, I knew there'd be a song. Damn it, of course it's this week. For those of you unaware, I have a list of every song that MLP has done so far, and I've just been kind of rating them against each other. So what I do every time I hear a new song is I look at that list, and I mentally think, how good is this song compared to that list? Usually I have to really process that, and I need the list to look at. That list is on my other computer, the one I don't currently have access to. So I'm going to have to listen to this song again once I get my comp back in order to be able to rate this. I didn't even try. I was just like, you know what, whatever. I'll just listen to the lyrics and just whatever. Because, moving on. So they sang back and forth. Lots of visual storytelling, lots of good lyric choice, as per usual. Very obvious biases on display. The 2 end up arguing over it, and this is also very cool because as much as it's tempting to show that the kids have grown up a bit, and they have, and they do show this in this episode, it's also good to point out the fact that the 2 kids, or the 3 kids, but you know, the 2 kids are still kids. One of the things that's most commonly misunderstood about children is that children don't understand things like scope and scale. This actually goes all the way to being a baby. You know, oh my gosh, I no longer have my toy in my hand, and they immediately start wailing and crying. Why? Because the younger we are, the less we understand the difference, the gradient between good and bad. When you're really, really young, when you're a freshborn child, you basically have 2 concepts there. Good, bad, cry. And that's about it. The older we get, and the more we understand, the more we start to realize the gradient that exists between these 2 things. So we have things that are very good, kind of good, sort of good, alright, kind of bad, sort of bad, etc. And we kind of have this whole thing. There's a difference between stubbing your toe and your car being destroyed, right? Now that sounds like a duh, but that's the kind of thing we grow to understand over time. A child doesn't have nearly as much of a gradient. Why is this relevant to the episode? Because these kids are still closer to here. And so they have an argument over this, and they treat it like it's a serious argument. It absolutely isn't. Writing children, 103, for anybody curious. Yeah, don't ever talk to me again. Uh-huh. Yeah, they don't actually mean that. They just lack the concepts, right? So, they're all angry at each other. We cut to Apple Bloom traveling back and forth between the 2 to share the link, to share their messages. I knew where that was going, but it still got a laugh out of me. Because, you know, they're sitting right next to each other. That was good. That was good. Anyways. So. They finally realize what's going on. This leads to an extremely good scene. Yeah, I know, Dreamless. That's why I'm kind of on that. If I was designing these show, I would have these people have grown up a little bit because it's been 8 freaking years. These should be in their 20s. Moving on. So Terramar stomps off, obviously, because he's already emotionally unstable and very confused, and then the people who are here to help him just get into a hissy fit about it. So of course he's confused, and of course he stomps off. Makes perfect sense, again. This then leads to a nice tidbit. This is a subtle point, but it's probably the single best moment of the whole episode, and I mean that. There's this bit where there's the 3 kids, and both of them are like, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. And Twilight says, why would I think it's your fault? Apple Bloom just glares and takes one step back. Both of the other two fools then look at each other, look back towards Apple Bloom, prompted by that, and then in one say, because it is our fault. That's actually good characterization. That's showing how much these 3 know each other and showing how much these 3 have grown over the course of the years. Because, yeah, no. And I love Apple Bloom's just no. It's good stuff. It's a great moment. It's a tiny little subtle character moment. So this then leads to his parents meeting each other, and they're still friendly. This is luck point number 3. Actually, I think we have more than this, but we'll get to that in a moment. This is also an interesting thing the episode does, and I think this is one of the smarter things the episode does. It's very quiet about why his parents are separated. In fact, it never even brings up the topic. No one ever says, why are your parents living in different places? Because there's a lot of options here. They could still be married. It's just one of them identifies as a hippogriff and so lives up there, and one of them identifies as a sea pony and lives over there. Right? I mean, there is such a thing as married people who just happen to live separately from each other. It's not like they're that far apart from each other, right? It could be that they're married but were divorced. Maybe they ended up separating and just decided to remain friends. That's a thing that happens. Maybe they were never married. That's a thing that happens too. However you look at it, though, the episode doesn't address it, and I think that's good because it's not really relevant. And it does keep the overall theme in mind. And yeah, and that theme is 2 loving families who actually still are friends with each other. They are still positive towards each other, and that's important. And again, luck point number 3 here. This then leads to the ending. This is probably the only part of the episode that kind of loses me a little bit. It keeps happening, right? This is when because the ending is a feel-good. But it is also a bit of a cheat. Because of the Pearl, because of having 2 wonderful places to live, because of having 2 parents who are more than capable of taking care of him, because both parents actually get along, he has this choice. He can take this third option of not having to choose. Under many other circumstances, many other permutations of these choices, there's a pretty good chance he would have to pick one and be okay with visiting the other. Or not visiting the other, as the case may be. This is why I wanted to call you back to that parallel. So even if we ignore the divorce allegory, which I do think was at least partially intentional here, let's look at the cultural allegory. Britain, America, right? North America, the colonists. That's what it is. So the colonists and the British, okay? Imagine in the equestrian version of that, first of all, there was no horrible stuff the colonists did. But second of all, because it's equestrian, it's better than real life. In the equestrian version of that equation, this is like having the option to just have a teleporter to go back and forth between your home in Britain and your home in the colonies in North America. And that sounds like I'm kind of making fun of the episode, and in a way I sort of am, because this is a super narrative cheat to make a happy ending happy. But that is equestrian in a nutshell. They have those options that we don't have in real life. I would have probably given this episode a substantially more positive rating than I am going to if they had done the extremely brave thing and actually made him choose. It doesn't. That's cool. Moving on. As a further aside, and the reason I keep using the colony thing, you can go back and forth, you can be both places, works way better as the cultural divide thing than the divorce thing. Because a kid living normally with two parents in two areas is a lot less likely in every possible way to be a good thing, and never mind possible, than it is for a kid who can go hang out with this crowd, this cultural crowd, and go hang out with this cultural crowd, right? And again, you'll notice how this once again touches upon the idea of identity. And this is the last point I'm going to bring. Last time I'm going to bring up that point. Last point I'm going to bring up in general, because Terramar identifies as both. Interesting, isn't it? So, either way, that's the episode. Black! I think this episode is as black as my heart. What do y'all think? Do I even have a heart anymore? I think I ripped that thing out a while ago. This is by Brian Holfield, who has never written an episode before. So, you know, I don't have anything to say about that. Let's close this out. No, that does sound about what I was going for, Trade, then I tend to agree. I'm seeing several reds and several oranges, and looks like 2 purples? It's a hell of a range. Also a good early entry for someone. There's 3 purples now. I don't think I can give this purple, in all honesty. I think it steps a few too many steps back from the purple line, for lack of a better way to put that. I think that if it addressed a couple of its topics a little bit more in depth, or again was brave enough to take a certain type of stance with regards to the ending, which it didn't, I think this would probably scooch over the line. I wish, like, I could think of a lot of ways that this could go purple, but as is, I think I'm going to go ahead and go with red. I do absolutely think this is a red episode. There's some great world building. There is some very in-character moments. There's a lot of tiny, nuanced things. I didn't even talk about how Twilight was just a delight the whole episode, about how much she was enjoying experiencing the different cultures and food and activities and how much fun she was having, and the outreach concept and the different people combining despite being different, which is kind of one of the main themes of the whole show as a whole. There was a lot of really cool stuff in this episode, but I don't think it has that extra oomph it needs. So... Also, did you notice that Twilight was learning about their... This is a common trick. Twilight was learning about their cultures while we were. The trick, if you're not familiar with it, is narratively you have someone who is new to a particular culture, and thus that culture has to be explained to them, and thus we get the explanation as they do. It's a way to bypass the exposition trap. Because, you know, if as you know, is such an aggravating thing. Imagine if Terramar and his dad were talking about hippogriff culture, and it's like, that's... You both know this. You both live here. Stop being dumb, right? Instead, it's being explained to someone who is actually new here and actually does need this stuff explained to them. There are better methods of exposition, but it's still much better than your typical exposition. And once again, speaks to the general quality of the writing on this show. That's all I got for this week. Normally, I feel like I've said this before. Normally, I look up ahead and see what's next, and it's like, okay, I can see the names, the horseplay, and the parent map, but that doesn't mean anything to me. So that's just whatever. Okay. Either way, Granny, what did Granny end up being? I think we gave that an orange. Hang on, let me scroll back here. Scroll. Nope, Granny got a red. Granny got a red. Granny's got wild. Granny's gone wild. I can talk, I swear. So, 2 reds in a row. Yeah, so far Season 8 has been mostly killing it. I think... Hang on. We've got reds, we've got oranges. I know there was one episode I didn't like. I'm trying to find it. Who the hell wrote that episode? There it is. Nick Confalone. Which was a blue. And I stand by that. So we've had 1 blue in Season 8, but otherwise we've had nothing below an orange. And that's impressive. Especially for a Season 8 of any show. That's surprising. So, either way, Next week, we'll cover those other episodes. Hopefully, I'll have my freaking computer by then. I'm going to chop off here. I will see those of you who care for more Bloodborne and more horrible, nightmarish Death Doom Tuesday.